Hi, this is Liz Kerin, and my book First Light, which is the sequel to Night's Edge, comes out on April 23rd. First Light continues the story of Mia from Night's Edge. Still reeling from the fallout of the catastrophe in Tucson, she goes on a mission to take down the man who destroyed her life and gave her mom a thirst for blood, and soon finds out that she might be the target instead. It's a vampire story, but it's also a coming of age story, and a lot of fun, bloody, huge things happen that we're gonna try to not spoil for you.
Okay, well, I guess the first thing I want to acknowledge is that I want to thank you for coming back because you're my first return guest, at least for this podcast. I did a podcast for like a decade, so that's a different story. But like for the ARC Party, you're my first return guest, so thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, I'm so honored to be the first returning guest, and I'm doing it for a sequel, so I am in and of myself a sequel. I like it.
Sequel for a sequel, it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, you were my ninth episode. Now you're my 37th episode. So,
Oh wow.
um, yeah, not that that means anything. It's just I'm a little bit of a statistics nerd, so.
No,
But
but
I
you've done
wanted
you've done so many. That's so great. You've been running like you put out so many episodes.
Well, I used to do a, an episode a week on my previous podcast, and it ended up being usually about 60 a year. But that was like book reviews and random talk. Getting
Mm.
authors on and interviewing is a different story. So I'm happy to kind of pace it out a little bit slower, and no one needs to hear from me that much. So,
Well,
but
I'm
I wanted to
excited.
start. Oh well, good, thank you. Again, like my first return guest, it makes me feel happy that I'm at the point now that yeah, I'm having return guests on. But I wanted to start out by talking about vampires because I re-listened to our last conversation earlier, and one of the things you said when you were talking about Night's Edge was something along the lines of, "I wrote a vampire book. No one was asking for one." And now, I don't know if you noticed, but I think the tides are turning a little bit on vampire stories. So I just got approved for an arc for Rachel Harrison's So Thirsty. So
It's so good.
and yeah, anything Rachel Harrison writes, I'm going to read now. But there are, I know Stephen Graham Jones just sold a vampire book that's coming out in the year or two. But there are so many more examples of vampires than there were even, 10 months ago or whatever. So I don't know if you noticed that or have any thoughts on that, but I really feel like the tide's turning on that.
I do have some thoughts on that. First of all, I'm psyched because I think that vampires so deserve a new modern reinterpretation. We've been overdue for it, and I guess that it kind of makes me chuckle because I'm like, oh, I've been here. Mine came out over a year ago, but okay, I guess now it's happening. um, but what kind of is also funny though is like in the marketing for the first Night's Edge book, I think that we were all being kind of coy about telling people it was a vampire book.
Yeah.
Like, I remember some of the early synopses and, little breadcrumbs that we were dropping on the internet about it didn't ever say the word vampire. And I actually wonder if that was, that we messed that up. Cause like, I wonder if we should have just leaned in and said vampire because now we're saying it more. And now it's like, oh, well, we're a part of this larger thing. So I don't know, but I love that it's having a comeback, and I'm just psyched to not be the only one writing a vampire book that nobody asked for, because that's how it felt.
Well, you can always just pretty confidently claim that you brought vampires back. Like
I could, but I don't think it was me. I just
it's
kind of like I nudged the door open just a little bit. I was like, "Psst, you guys, there's free food." Like,
when I think about vampire novels from before, obviously the first stuff that comes to mind is like Twilight and things like that, because that's more recent. That's more contemporary than like, going back to Dracula and things. And those seemed kind of different than the type of horror we're getting nowadays is more of, we're using this setting to analyze things about people as opposed to just we have this angsty protagonist or whatever it is, like or like a it's not as vapid and sexy and weird. It's actually like more introspective and more of a way that gives us an opportunity to think about, you know, the challenges in our life. So that's kind of my interpretation of how horror is moving right now. Do you
Yeah.
feel any different? Because I feel like when I read, you know, Night's Edge and now First Light, I had that feeling of more like it's a way that we can explore personal dynamics and things. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I think that that is what drew me to this genre in the first place. I mean, I obviously love being scared. I love when things are gross. I love when things are unsettling. But to me, horror and fantasy are really, really potent ways to talk about our relationships to one another, just being alive, and just and families. I actually just did a little like listicle for Electric Lit. I don't think it's posted yet, but I said something like 8 vampire books that hit close to home, and I was
Mm,
trying to list vampire stories that were about family, and there aren't very many of them, but they're out there, and there's going to be more.
yeah.
So I just love using horror tropes to dissect what, where we're at emotionally as individuals and as a culture. So found that opportunity with Night's Edge, and it was a very it was a quieter narrative in the first one. It was really personal. It was just these two women and then their love interests and then the worlds colliding, and it was a very small story. And then just like the genre is opening up, so too is the world of these books, that like First Light completely just cracks the whole thing wide open, and it's not just these two women at the dinner table. So I feel like, yeah, we're kind of moving with the times in that sense, and I completely agree that's where the genre is going, and I couldn't be happier that that's what's happening. It makes me love it even more.
Yeah. I am 100% in the same place as you are with that. But yeah, talking about going from Night's Edge to First Light, um, yeah, it almost kind of inverts the situation completely.
Yeah.
So in Night's Edge, Mia is almost kind of a prisoner to her circumstances with her mom, and very controlled, and has really no agency or anything. And we don't see a lot of the vampire side of how the world works. There's like kind of whispers of it, and like the things that are necessary kind of invade her narrative, but we don't see a lot of it. But now with First Light, um, it's so different. There's like so much, and I was wondering, I was like, how is this going to go? Because you, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. You didn't go nuts with world building for how the vampire stuff works in Night's Edge. So now that Mia's out in the world and not in this kind of contained situation, I was wondering how it was going to be different. But your um, construction of what life is like with these vampires, and what their the centers are like, and how daily life changed to um, try and prevent problems with vampires was so well detailed and well built that I was like, wow, like I know I'm going to get to a point where you can talk. It's a big thought for
No,
me,
go
but
for
like,
it.
yeah, it
Yeah,
really
yeah. You're talking.
it really kind of inverted from being very contained and feeling like kind of claustrophobic to like there's this whole world, and it gave you the opportunity to explore so many different kind of elements of being a person in this world, and it was done very well. So um did you like that kind of more openness where you had to build more stuff? Because it seems very different than how the first book was structured.
So, knowing that I was going to do a sequel, I wasn't really even interested in doing one at all if I had to do the same thing. Like I think in order for a sequel to be successful, in my opinion, you need to have a character whose arc you need to complete, and you want to follow them and you want to complete it, and you want the world to open up. You simply cannot just do what you did a second time. Um, and all of Mia's circumstances pointed in that direction anyway. Her life was going to open up, and so the world was going to open up. It was a natural shift. Um, and also, I kind of just was waiting for the right opportunity to do the Sara centers and show what life was like in other cities over the past 10 years that this has been going on, show the country at large and how each region kind of deals with it and talks about it. And what it's like to be a Sara. And, aside from her mother's very limited point of view, what is their culture? What are they talking about on the internet? What are they getting away with? Like, I had fun, honestly. It was probably the most fun I've ever had writing anything ever. And now I'm sad because I'm like, will I ever get that feeling back? I don't know.
Wow. Um, well, I guess it comes out in the story because it was very inventive and and pretty original too. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't believe I've kind of seen or read before, as far as like how society would handle the existence of vampires. And so that was cool to like see. And then from the perspective of talking about Mia as the protagonist, one of the things that I kind of wrote down as an observation was that in the first book, she was totally controlled by her situation. And now that she's free, it's not like she's just free. Like she's now encountering all these situations where she has to still fight for her agency and her ability to choose for herself, but like in different ways. And so it was interesting to see her hit those types of struggles and how she would handle them, or how she would, adapt to situations. And yeah, that was really cool too, that it wasn't just like a 180 from how she was before. She still is fighting for her ability to choose for herself.
Yeah, and I think that a huge part of her growth and her personality is learning how to advocate for herself and learning how to navigate tough situations. Her growth as a person was really stunted, and so it's only natural that you're not going to just dive into book 2 and have her be this like badass brave girl. I mean, she's on a very different mission when you meet her, but then she's also still acknowledging the whole time like, I'm really anxious. I'm really scared. What am I going to do? I'm making this up as I go. I still miss my mother. I'm still grieving, like, and I'm still so scared of this man. And why am I doing this? Like, she's not Sarah Connor. She's like a tightly wound ball the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that one of the things I liked about um, the way that she acts in this book is I wrote it down as her being very determined but inept, because like you said,
Yes.
like she's stunted. She doesn't have the normal kind of experiences that someone else would. So she's got this idea of what she's going to do, but she's pretty helpless. And all she really has is her drive to like the goal. And so I thought that was a pretty cool way of playing that character out.
Thanks. Yeah, you walk a tightrope where like in every scene I kind of had to ask myself like, is she annoyingly inept? Is she like just being stupid right now, or is this something where I understand that a really sheltered person might not get what's going on in this situation, might not know how to ask for help. So like, you had to strike a balance there, otherwise she was going to drive people crazy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But I think that was the right play. I think
Mhm.
you did. Um, you honored kind of her original journey with the way that she acted as a character in this book. But I like that. So she gets out of her situation at home and moves to New York, and um, there's kind of this parallel journey of trying to be a normal person, but then also picking up a little bit of a detective kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it's nice that she is looking for jobs and starts to audit classes and thinking about her education and stuff like that. But then also just kind of can't let go of trying to figure out how, what's going on with with Devon and the Saras and everything. So she starts to do a little bit of detective work and stuff. And so I thought that was cool that, she's trying to grow up, but just can't let go of that thing from the past that's bothering her.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty indicative of like, even just on a mundane everyday level with just us as people, we want to, move to the next stage in our life. We want to, get over something, but we can't force it. We can move to a new city, we can change jobs, we can do XYZ, but like really we just have to confront the monster and be like, okay, one last time, am I dealing with this? Am I looking it in the eye? So Mia's doing that literally because she feels in her gut that she just like won't really ever be able to move on with her life if this
Yeah.
guy is still out there. And she's just like, forget it. I'm just going to drop everything and do that then because I can't seem to be satisfied in any other way.
Yeah. And it's crazy because in order to kind of scratch that itch, she's fully aware of how dangerous putting herself in situations could be, but that's
Mhm.
the only way that she can make progress on, you know, putting that thing to rest. And so she has to, um, I guess the way that she chooses to do that is by volunteering at one of the Sara centers, which means we get to see the inside of one of these centers and see what
Mhm.
goes on. Cause it's only been kind of rumored from the perspective of, people who are, thinking it's like a torture center. So getting
Right.
inside of one and finding out it might be a different story, I thought was really cool too. And the way that you wrote it kind of put us at ease about the danger, but the danger was when still there and still real. So it was cool that a good chunk of the book was let's see what actually happens in these centers and like is it just we're torturing these other things or is it that we actually want to help people?
Yeah, I think that like the danger of the Sara centers is actually just psychological.
Yeah.
Like they're not doing horrible torture experiments on them. A lot of these people sign up for medical trials and they're like really helping and they have a nice community and the centers are like the really nice one that Mia works at is like a hotel in New York. Like it's
Yeah.
really quite fancy and like really like wealthy people get to stay there. But as Mia soon discovers, and also as she gets to know some of the people there, it's still a prison. They still can't leave and they have issues. They can't really have friends outside of the center, or they can, but it's all really tricky. Having relationships is really hard. And they're stuck there forever. Like they can't do anything. So
Yeah.
it's really it's a gilded prison and that's the psychological toll that Asara Center takes. And that's a more to me, that was a more interesting route. Instead of just her walking in and hearing the screams and there's blood all over the floor. Oh my God. Like, no, it's a quieter mental unraveling that's going on with all these people.
Yeah, I think Guild in Prison is a great way to say it. It's almost like you've probably already said that. Uh, um, but and it also gave you the opportunity to because she's going to be in the center to meet different people, so you could show what different people's experiences were, what the tragedy of their life is. So it was a cool way too to get little slices of life of like this is not everybody wanted to become a Sara. Not everybody, there's tragedy. There's often
Yeah.
tragedy, and we got to see a lot of that. So I think that was a great part of the book too.
Thank you. I think there's a version of this that could have just been like a collection of short stories and personal essays, like
Yeah.
from the POV of all the Saras at the New York Center. That's another thing, but like that's not what this was. But that was, I thought about each and every one of those people and like, where they came from and what their Sara origin story might have been. And what your Sara origin story is becomes a really important emotional part of this plot. So yeah, I found that really like a rich playground character wise.
Yeah, especially with and I hope this doesn't spoil anything. We can cut it out, but like the way that what your life was like when you changed, when you were
Yeah.
turned or lifted, I guess you
Yeah.
kind of fixate on that in a way,
Hmm.
like what like that one person was just knitting stuff like in, like all the time and stuff. So um that was an interesting psychological kind of thing too, is that, you know, I hadn't thought about it until reading this book, but turning into a Sara is an incredibly traumatic event. So, yeah, of course you're going to have some sort of fixation on the moment and the time in your life where it happened and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even when, we encounter traumatic events, it's not like we stop aging, but imagine
Yeah.
you had a very violent, life-changing traumatic event and you stopped aging. That the psychological fallout of that is huge. So, yeah, the whole concept of like anchoring and like what are the activities and the personality quirks that you had at the time that you were changed. And you carry those weird little things with you for the rest of your life. And depending on the severity of the thing, it could be as quirky as being like, don't show me a season of Survivor that aired after,
Hmm.
2010, or it could be something like deeply damaging,
Yeah.
depending on who you are. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was really cool. So I think that the whole like look inside the centers was a great kind of evolution of this world you created.
Thanks.
Um, Talking about love.
Ah, love.
So, so in the first book, Mia meets Jade. I screwed that up, but I flipped that around. But Mia meets Jade, and for all intents and purposes, they really get into each other, and there's a real relationship going. And then it turns out that Jade wasn't necessarily fully single
Hmm.
when their relationship was evolving, and so it kind of fell out. But Jade does exist in first light as well. But Mia also meets Cora when she's in the center and is drawn very strongly to Cora. And but Jade still very, very inexperienced with love and relationships and stuff like that. So the question I wrote down is, what is love for Mia? Because even from a familial experience, like perspective, that's not an easy question to answer. So that's what I'm going to throw you. Any answer you want to give, but what is love for Mia?
I think love for Mia is the ability to let go and feel safe for the first time. She definitely didn't have that with her mom. It was all just codependency all the time. And even though Jade made her feel very alive and sexy and interesting, um, I think Mia never felt secure around her. She never felt safe. She was always second guessing, like,
Mm-hmm.
am I saying something stupid? And like, I feel like Jade's hiding something from me. What is it? And then finding out she hadn't been honest with her. She can never feel secure in that relationship ever. And I think like what Cora offers her is safety emotionally and physically. Without giving too much away, I think that for the very first time, I think that like there's literally a chapter really early on where she and Cora are in the car and they're like just talking very candidly about sex. And Mia's like, really uncomfortable. And Cora's just like, hey, I'll stop talking about this if you want. I want you to feel safe about this stuff. And you seem
Mm-hmm.
to not feel good. What's up? And I feel like that's a question no one's ever asked Mia before.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Do you feel safe to be in this situation or discuss this? No one's ever given her that kind of space. And so I think that that carries over throughout Mia's relationship. And, where the book ultimately ends up is that Mia feels safe enough to pursue a new chapter in her life because of love. So I think that's what love is for her.
Yeah, that's great. And that makes me think about something about the format of the book, which is that it's kind of parallel timelines from like a then and now situation.
Hmm.
And so and I love it when I kind of have to try and figure out how does this connect with like because there's like a then and now. So like we start off with the
Yeah.
then or the now, and I'm like, ooh, how is this all going to kind of come together? And
Yeah.
so you get to see some of that intimacy between Mia and Cora before you really understand where it came from. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I think that was a really effective way of connecting, or kind of building toward what ultimately happened in the book. But it also I think gave you the opportunity to be really tricky with some like of the reveals that happen later in the book that are pretty significant. So
Right.
yeah, I think was I have to imagine that that was the only way you were going to be able to write this, correct?
Yeah, I just don't think it never occurred to me to plot out those reveals in a different way. I really enjoy writing dual timelines and or dual perspectives. I don't really know how to write without doing that. It is kind of my crutch, but in this case, was it was more of like, a fulcrum, and I was able to build everything around it. Like, yeah, there is one specific reveal we are referring to that the
Yes.
listeners will eventually know what we're talking about, but there's a huge thing that gets
Yeah.
hinted at and hinted at and hinted at in the early chapters. And I've had like friends reading the arcs and texting me being like, did I just read that right? What are you saying? And I'm like, I'm not going to answer you. Just keep going. And then even, characters even give voice to it throughout. Like I literally have like Devon say at one point, he's like, I'm just dying to know how that happened. And I'm
Right.
like,
Exactly.
yeah, well, I'm not going to tell you yet. Not you, not anybody. So that's kind of just, yeah, that's how I layered it, where I just want it to be just a triple decker sandwich of violence and twists. So I hope
Yeah.
it worked.
Yeah. No, it was great, and it made the idea that things aren't as simple as you know things aren't black and white. There's a lot
Yeah.
of, especially when they're personal experiences and stuff, like you can't just chalk it up to this is good or this is bad,
Yeah.
so I think it was really it provided a great way of exploring the nuances of the world that they're in, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say things in a non spoiler
I
way.
know. Well, the mechanics of the midpoint twist simply, they exist for me emotionally, because the goal for me and Mia's emotional arc was for her to get to a point where everything her mother ever experienced made sense,
Yeah,
and that she could hold space for forgiving her because it all made sense, but also say like, but also this was unacceptable, and I know now that there was a better way for you to do this. But going through everything Mia goes through is simply just her way of now seeing her mother in a different light.
yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, and I was going to get to forgiveness, but we're there, so we might as well just talk about it. And obviously, we're not going to talk about what causes what forgiveness or anything like that. But
Right.
that was kind of the feeling I got at the end of the book, was like, and it was so revelatory for me because I mean, we've all got our personal experiences that forgiveness is a question in. And I know that the last time we talked about my absent father and everything, and that's exactly how I felt. Like I I can forgive being, you know, all of the poor qualities of the person, but the fact that they didn't try harder to be a dad. And like that's kind of the feeling I got from this book is what you said is um there's a lot of things that you can forgive and let go of, but sometimes there's like those things that yeah, like are unforgivable.
Yeah, and I think like something that's very tricky and something that I think a lot of young adults are grappling with, and I'm in my 30s now and I'm still sifting through all of that muddy stuff. It's not so black and white, and I think that we right now live in a cultural moment where everything is extremely black and white, and forgiveness falls into that bucket, where it's like, well, why would you forgive them? Just go no contact. Who cares? And
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I respect that for sure. You have to put yourself first. Forgiveness doesn't mean you go crawling back to someone and give them everything they're asking of you.
Hmm.
To me, forgiveness just means putting on their hat and trying to see how they move through the world and being like, oh shit, okay, your circumstances were really messed up, and you were, hurt people. And that's
Yeah.
what I, kept coming back to in this book, because it's just like there's layers upon layers of abused people abusing people in this story. And
Yep.
yeah, it's forgiveness is the grayest gray area that exists, I think, in the human condition. And so Mia says something towards the end. I'll try to paraphrase so it's not really a spoiler, but it's kind of just like, you need to eventually learn to live in the space where two truths meet. And it's not a comfortable space, but it's the only way you can maybe move on with your life. Um, and you're not harboring anger all the time, because that's another thing.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, oh man, it's just such a tricky notion, and it's different for every person. So
Yep.
when Mia talks about what forgiveness means to her and whether she even can, that comes from just me, because like I can only move through the world as myself. So I'm like, okay, well, this is how I think I feel about it. I'll give this to her because, this is my truth. And this is the only way I know how to be honest about it. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I found it very relatable, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, but also just the idea that at some point you're going to have to confront the hard stuff in your life and process through it. So there's a lot of stuff from having cancer I haven't really tried to tackle yet. So,
Yeah.
and I know at some
Yeah.
point I will. So like, obviously there's a time and a place to do that, but like, you can't just bury things and think that everything's going to be okay. So,
Yeah.
I thought that
Yeah.
it was a nice, it was a nice part of the book. I'm going to, when we're not like recording, I'm going to tell you how I felt about the ending, but,
Okay. Yeah.
but the forgiveness
Yeah.
message of it, I think, is really relatable and it's really powerful. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. I was building, yeah, I was reverse engineering from that scene all the way through.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding. Well, so to talk about that, there's kind of a parallel relationship that is interesting to think about, because we didn't really see a lot of Devon in the first book,
Mm-mm.
and we see much more Devon in this book. And Devon in the first book was that kind of um, evil lurking in the shadows person, and now
Yeah.
Devon's a real person that kind of like this whole forgiveness approach. We have to kind of see and experience, and it's different than we expected. And so there's that, which is really cool. But Devon's got a buddy named Gareth who
Yeah.
he grew up with, and so there's um, the thing I liked about that was Gareth can be kind of an analog for Mia in ways, because Devon got turned into a Sara, and Gareth was there to help by giving him blood and helping him survive,
Mm.
and they kind
Yeah.
of formed a symbiosis, and so it's very parallel to what Mia and Izzy went through. So that's a cool analog, but it's also nice that at some point Mia has someone that she knows that like has gone through something similar. So
Mm-hmm.
um, great, great kind of character building, because it gave us a different picture of Devon too. But I don't know. I love that. So anything you got to say about them as friends or them
Yeah.
as analogs or whatever, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I always knew that one of the reasons I was excited to work on a sequel was because I knew there was so much more to to what Devin was all about, and his relationship to Mia's mom and his relationships to the other people in his orbit and what he was even doing out there.
Yeah.
I knew there was so much to do with that. And I always knew I was going to need to give him like a counterpart. I was going to need to give him like a Renfield. So that
Yeah.
was my idea from the beginning. And something I had thought about a lot writing Night's Edge was this idea that like, well, if you're a Sara, the person who is your bloodletter, your bleeder, needs to be super duper sober, and you as a Sara can't, you can't die. So there's kind of this thing going on with Gareth where he was formerly an addict and he got clean to keep his friend alive. Fine, that's kind of great for both of them. How nice.
Right. Hmm.
But, Devon's kind of dangling the carrot of, well, someday I'll make you like me and then nothing can kill you. How cool is
Yeah.
that? You don't have to live in this weak little shell of a body anymore. And that's really tempting. I think a lot of my readers already know that I did write a short story about Gareth that takes place before Night's Edge does. And you can get more into like what his whole situation has been. Um, but yeah, and Gareth was really important because he validated for Mia that that Devon was a bad guy, but like
Yeah.
there's nothing you can really do about it. Like Gareth will say to her, like, oh yeah, no, he does that and it sucks. I can't do anything about it. It's just how he is. But like
Yeah.
even just someone, because she gets so gaslit by his whole little freaky little family and him specifically, she just doesn't know which way is up. So Gareth does provide her kind of like a mental North Star to be like, no, no, he still sucks. Believe
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So and using, as the story really dramatically comes to a head, using Gareth in the third act to do what needs to be done, it was, yeah, that's a scene. That's a scene. So
Yeah, Gareth. I was going to bring up that short story 167 or 167
mhm, mhm.
because I read it today because I was like,
Oh, okay, cool.
I know there's a story, and I read it, and that so in the book, Gareth was kind of like secretly one of the top favorite characters for me going along. Like he's
Mhm.
easy to want to root for and everything. Reading that
Yeah.
story, oh man, like I want a Gareth book. Like it's such a
Poor
rich
Gareth, I know.
story, but like of yeah, him suffering and caring and putting all of his eggs in the worst basket.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Mhm.
so Gareth as a character I thought was like a huge addition to the storyline. Really, really
Thank
cool.
you.
Really cool. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I think like also there's the element, I mean, 167 kind of like clarifies some relationship stuff between them because there is this honestly there's this kind of like erotic undercurrent between them the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think in first light you're like, what's going on over there? What has gone on over there? And some questions get answered. And yeah, he just put all his eggs in the worst possible basket, like you just said.
Yeah.
It's funny,
But
I think we
that's
were yeah, sorry, go ahead.
well, he didn't have a lot of choices though, and that's the thing. You wrote it well
No.
because like there was one basket. He didn't have a lot of choices. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's really tragic about that character is by the time he really, bonded with Devon and reconnected with him, that he was at a point where, as an addict, he had betrayed a lot of his friends and family and hurt them, and is in his apology making stage, and he's not ready to do that, and he thinks everybody still hates him, and this one person is like, I don't hate you. I'm going to help
Yep.
you out. Also, give me your blood. This helps you. I'm helping you get clean. Ah,
Yeah.
so
Too
yeah.
bad he's a crazy narcissist and taking advantage of
Yeah.
the situation.
Yeah. It's like, but, I gave you something rehab couldn't. Like, oh my God. So
Yeah.
yeah, poor
Yeah. That
Gareth.
was a cool dynamic, and it was cool to see the relationship between someone who's a Sara and someone who for a long time is the blood source that's not Mia and her mom. So as like
Mhm.
kind of a way of seeing, I think psychologically people just kind of fall into these dependency patterns and stuff like
Yeah.
independently. And it's just because circumstances kind of place you in that situation. So it's cool to see that like probably this happens a lot in this world.
Yeah. I think it happens a lot mainly you see it in romantic relationships, honestly, when people just bond to toxic people and they just get something out of it. They
Yeah.
each are getting something out of it. It's a really like really poisonous symbiosis. And that's what, the bleeder and the Sara relationship represents, whether, and we, with Izzy and Mia, you had it being parent and child, but that exists
Mhm.
also. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Um, I wanted to talk about the the group that Devon kind of creates or manifests throughout the kind of arc of the stories is called Adapt, and
Hmm.
I thought that was a pretty interesting thing too, because naturally in a situation like this, it's basically like a group of outlaws band together to kind of like increase their odds or whatever.
Right.
Um, but and again, trying to dodge doing anything too spoilery, like their their mission seems pretty sinister because they talk about the idea of like inversion or whatever, a point where there's more Saras than non. Um, but like, I think one of the things that the book does well is to create the idea that um, life's not easy for a Sara. So really, like when it comes down to it, Adapt is just a bunch of scared people trying to survive, and on its kind of at the surface. But then like the people driving it are a little bit kind of have some selfish or like insane kind of ideas on top of it. Would that be
Yeah.
accurate? And is that spoilery or no?
I don't think that's spoilery,
Okay,
no,
cool.
because I think like you talk about who are the kind of people who get drawn into culty situations, like it's people who are scared, who don't have a community, who need structure, who feel lonely. Saras are very threatened out in the real world. If they're free, they're living really sad little lives like Izzy was. And so this idea that there's a community of people who can like teach her how to love herself and be more, like that's kind of great. And they're helping
Yeah.
each other survive. The concept of it emotionally and mentally is very nice. And it's like it makes sense, or at least it did to me, why people on the internet would be so drawn to that message. Um, because it is really noble and appealing. But like the people who are running the show, and so often you get that. You have something that seems so well-meaning on the surface, and then you learn about like the people who started the movement, and you're like, oh no, he did what? Oh, we can't follow them anymore. Jeez.
Yep.
So it's kind of that unmasking your idol thing.
Hmm.
And Devon has a partner in all of this, who, once you figure out what their relationship actually is and what their end game really actually looks like, you feel pretty bad for all these people who fell for it. And hopefully you
Yeah.
don't see them as total psychotic predators. So yeah.
Yeah. And I know that there's just every kind of crazy example of like cult documentaries. I've fallen into many a rabbit hole. And I
Hmm.
think one of the things that someone said, it's probably something that someone says in all of these cult documentaries, but like you don't decide to join a cult. Um,
No.
you find something that speaks to you and then you dedicate yourself to it. And so I feel like that's kind of like how this would work. But the other thought that I had, and I wonder if there's any kind of momentum to this idea, would be like there is a degree of people feeling um, oppressed or hunted or exiled or outlawed or whatever, and like
Hmm.
the idea that there's only so far you can push someone before they want to push back. And so I feel like there
Yeah.
was kind of maybe an element of that with, so you got a mix of people who are just scared and want a community. You've got the people who maybe are more radicalized because they feel like it's us against them, and that's not going to end up ever being a good situation, I think.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to what I was hoping to accomplish with Cora, at least when Mia first meets her, because she's extremely radicalized and she's mad as hell and she's violent and she keeps getting in trouble. She's a bad bitch, and that's
Hmm.
what makes her attractive and cool. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's quite tragic. Yeah, like push me hard enough times, I'm gonna push back.
Yeah.
And that's where she's at mentally. So I was hoping to encapsulate exactly that experience through her character. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's nice that she's pretty front and center in the story,
Yeah.
to kind of be that vein of thought, without, because like you didn't have to make the whole movement about that. We had a
Mm-hmm.
character that showed us that that was a feeling that existed in the world. So yeah, that was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
One thing I want to ask if we can talk about, because I found this infinitely fascinating, but I didn't know if this was a place we could go or not, was the concept of kid Saras,
Yeah.
because that is introduced. Saras who are became Saras when they're children, and whoa, that was kind of like a mind screwing moment where, like, because it was a cool reveal. It was like, oh, by the way, there's these, and it's so far into the book, and then your mind just has to be like, oh man, I can't even imagine what that would be like for kids. So where did that come from in your process?
Hmm. I knew that, well, Pyotr, who was the Russian boy who was, the Sara who kind of spread it all over the place, um, you know, he's still 8 years old. And, we've had vampire kids in literature in the
Mm-hmm.
canon forever. But the difference between like Claudia from Interview with a Vampire and like
Yeah,
Pyotr and the other kids we meet later on in First Light is like, Claudia is a child, but like she understands that like she should be an adult
yeah.
and she'd like to be a lady. And so she does certain things that are disturbingly adult sometimes. And that's what makes her super interesting. And that's kind of just her arc and, Anne Rice's whole thing with her. But for me, it was important to me that the kids were just kids. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of the tragedy of this disease. And that they are Peter Pan. They do not get to grow up.
Yeah.
And as a result, a lot of then the next question that you have to ask yourself is like, well, in our modern society, there are predators who probably would think, oh, but this kid is not really a kid. And then these children get preyed upon, right?
Right.
But they're kids.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question. So, and Cora specifically, so there was a version of this book that one of my earlier drafts, Cora was a bit younger when she got changed into Asara. She had been 18. She had just graduated from high school. And I, in the end, made her like 21, graduated from
Right.
college, or just about to graduate, because the whole thing is she never did. Because something that I grappled with Cora was like, okay, when you're 18, yeah, the world says you're an adult, but like I remember what I was like when I was 18.
Uh-huh.
And if I were
Yeah.
stuck at 18 forever, I wouldn't be as smart and I might be really annoying. And I wanted Cora to feel believably adult. So that was why I aged her up. But like the whole idea is that she got lucky. She got turned when she was a young adult. If it happens to you when you're 12 forever. And like that can also be a very difficult person to control.
Right.
Um, these, kids don't have any impulse control. What if you're, yeah, I mean, I think Cora says at one point, like, yeah, have you ever seen a toddler having a meltdown in the grocery store because her mom won't buy her a candy bar? Like, imagine that kid is strong enough to snap her neck. And
Yeah.
you're like, yep, got it. So, yeah.
Uh-huh. It just introduced, it makes the reader, at least me, I don't know if it's gonna make every reader, but it made me kind of look at the perspective of that differently. Like if you're arrested at this age and this level of development forever, like that's kind of a horror story of its own. And
Yeah.
but like what do you do in that situation? And it was cool to see that Cora's reaction was, I want to care for these people, as opposed
Hmm.
to like they're freaks, I want to avoid them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that to me kind of feeds into, Cora's like altruism and her career goals and her personal goals, that she feels very nurturing. And, I speak to people I know in my personal life who, have fostered children. Um, don't, it's not foster to adopt. They just open their doors and keep these children coming through, and a lot of them have deep psychological damage and just need a lot of care and a lot of love and space. And it takes a very gifted person and a very special person to approach a child who needs that kind of help. And that's what Cora is. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And also one of the many things that just makes her attractive
Mhm.
and like just great. Um, I ship Cora and Mia very hard. Like, I think it's clear.
Yeah,
but
especially yeah, yeah.
yeah. But yeah.
I have to imagine that it's intimidating to do a sequel to anything, um, because like the kind of traditional thought is that usually the sequel isn't as good or whatever. Um, what I will say before I let you talk is that I think that this elevated the story in ways I did not expect, and it really does feel like one big story. Like each book reads nicely as its own thing, but it does read kind of as one nicely continuous thing. And so I really like the way that the world kind of was blown open and we got to see so much more, and it changed our perspectives about things and all that. But I guess my question for you is, and I know it was planned early on as a duology, but did you have any kind of nerves about like sticking the landing, or did you really kind of feel like you knew what the story was going to be the whole time?
I initially definitely had nerves about sticking the landing. Because it just felt like a really ambitiously plotted story, especially with the way I was gonna interlace time and those, stacking those reveals. Like the plan I had felt crazy at first, and I was like, there's probably a better, simpler way to do this, but I don't know what it is, and I just gotta try. And then once I just really, really dug in deep and figured out exactly what my ending was and reverse engineered from there, then I knew what I had. And I didn't fully know what I had until I got to like maybe page 300 of that first draft, even though I had a really like chunky outline. I didn't follow all of it because there was something going on. Um and I'll try not to be too spoilery, but I hit a point in the story where I just found like Mia's relationship with Devon to be so weird and so layered that I was just like, let's hit pause for a second and just kind of like sit with this. What's this?
Hmm.
And at that point, I don't know, something kind of shifted in me where I started understanding certain things about the characters even more. And so there are some building blocks about the third act that fell into place, especially when it comes to like the character of Margot, who was not even that significant in the first draft.
Hmm.
Needless to say, I did know where I was going emotionally the whole time. I knew where I wanted Mia to end up, like, in her heart. And I knew what the body count needed to be also. But other than that, I had to slow down and kind of like let the characters play around a little bit. And once I let that happen, it was really, really fun and eye-opening, and like I said earlier, the most fun I've ever had writing something, and I will probably spend the rest of my life trying to like recapture that feeling of excitement. Bummer.
Well, that's, I mean, an exciting bummer, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm happy it happened.
Yeah. Well, consider the landing stuck. I think this book does so much honor to the story in general and is so entertaining on its own. So, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
I want to thank you for coming back, for being my first repeat guest, and for I'm doing this is my thank you now. I'm thanking you for spending the time making such entertaining, good stories that give people something to read and talk about. So, thank you for all of that.
Oh, thank you for consuming it and being down to talk about it. Nothing gives me greater joy than to just have these conversations. It's a wonderful feeling. So thank you for doing this.